My sister exposed my most painful secret about my ex during a game, but what I did after that silenced the whole family and ended the show for good. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and this is something that just happened at my family's annual game night. Game night has always been a tradition in our family, something we all look forward to every year. It's a competitive, loud, and sometimes messy event, but it's always been fun. We gather at my parents' house, my parents, my siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, and sometimes a few extended relatives. Everyone gets a bit into it, but it's always been more about enjoying each other's company than actually winning. At least, that was the case until this year. The competitiveness has always been there, though. We pick games that get intense, play games where alliances form and break, where everyone tries to outsmart each other's moves. The games involve a lot of bluffing, so you never really trust anyone, but somehow it's always stayed good-natured. This year, though, something changed. My sister, who's married to a guy named Daniel, brought him along for the first time. We've all known him for a few months now, and while I'd never had a solid reason to dislike him, something about him rubbed me the wrong way. He's got this air about him, like he's always trying a little too hard to fit in. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I saw him walking in with my sister that night, I had a bad feeling, like he wasn't going to mesh with the vibe we usually have at these things. Right away, Daniel started talking about how he's amazing at strategy games, how he never loses, and how this game was going to be a walk in the park for him. I honestly thought he was just trying to impress everyone, like a lot of people do when they're new to a family dynamic. It didn't sit well with me, but I figured I'd let it slide. It's not like we haven't had overconfident people before. My dad picked one of our usual high-stakes games, a game that's all about deception, alliances, and bluffing. It's a game where the tension always builds, and by the end, someone's usually flipping tables or storming out, but it's always been in good fun. This time, though, Daniel was acting weird from the start. He started accusing people of cheating over the smallest things, little rule disputes that usually get laughed off. But not this time. Daniel wasn't laughing, he was serious, and it made the atmosphere uncomfortable. I noticed my parents exchanging uneasy glances, like they were unsure how to handle it, but no one said anything. My sister just brushed it off, saying, "Oh, Daniel's just really competitive." As the rounds went on, things got even more uncomfortable. Daniel wasn't just complaining about the rules, he was specifically targeting me. He kept making snide remarks about how my strategies were terrible and how I was too obvious with my moves. At first I ignored him, thinking it was just part of the game, but it got worse. He kept undermining every move I made, calling out every decision like I didn't know how to play. Finally, my cousin, my mom, and I decided to form an alliance to take Daniel down. We were all tired of his attitude, so we planned to team up and stop him from winning the next round. At that point, it wasn't even about the game anymore. It was about something deeper. At the most crucial moment in the round, my dad flipped sides without warning. He started helping Daniel, handing him the victory. I thought it was just a game, but the way he acted, it felt like there was something bigger going on, something I didn't understand yet. That was the night I started realizing Daniel had a hold on more than just the game. The rest of us just stared at each other, completely stunned. My dad had never broken an alliance before. He was always the one who kept the peace, the one who tried to make sure the game stayed fair. But this time, it felt personal, like he was deliberately siding with Daniel. Daniel smirked, acting as though his win was inevitable. "Strategy, my friend. You should have seen it coming," he said. It was just a game, but something about the way my father had sided with him unsettled me. I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept quiet. This wasn't just about the game anymore. Something else was going on, something I didn't understand. The entire night shifted from something lighthearted to something that felt like a betrayal. As the game wrapped up, no one really talked about what had happened. My dad didn't offer any explanation, and my sister acted like nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. It was like the whole night had been a blur of tension, awkward silences, and strange alliances. I left feeling unsettled, like there was something deeper going on, but I couldn't quite figure it out. Now, after everything that happened, I just can't shake the feeling that my family's never going to be the same after this. The morning after game night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was just a game, right? But it didn't feel like just a game anymore. There was something about how everything unfolded, how my dad sided with Daniel, how my sister acted like nothing had happened. Nothing added up. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but the unease kept gnawing at me, even hours after I'd left my parents' house. By the time the sun was setting, I decided I needed to confront my dad. I wasn't about to let it slide, not when something felt so wrong. So I called him up and we agreed to talk over dinner. I asked him straight out why he had flipped sides during the game. It wasn't like him to make those kinds of moves, especially so suddenly. He brushed it off quickly, saying it was just part of the strategy, that sometimes you have to switch alliances in games like that. But there was something in his voice, some hesitation, that made me feel like he wasn't telling me the whole truth. I pressed him, but he just waved it away, telling me to forget about it. Later that night, my mom pulled me aside. She was acting a little strange, nervous even. "You need to let it go." "It was just a game," she said. I could see it in her eyes, there was more to it, but she wouldn't say what. She wasn't angry or upset, just worried. Her eyes kept darting to the kitchen, like she didn't want anyone to hear, but she didn't explain anything further. It was clear that something was going on, but no one wanted to talk about it. I wasn't going to let this go. A few days later, I caught up with my cousin, who had also been at the game night. I told him what was happening, how I felt like Daniel was getting more and more control over things. He didn't hesitate for a second before suggesting that Daniel might be testing how much power he could exert over the family. At first, I thought it was an absurd idea. How could he be doing that? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Daniel wasn't just playing a game. He was working his way into my father's trust. Over the next few weeks, he started giving him unsolicited business advice, speaking as though he were an expert. My dad, normally skeptical of outsiders, surprisingly took an interest. It was subtle at first, but little by little, I could see Daniel positioning himself as someone my dad could rely on. I started noticing small things. My sister was acting different around Daniel, almost like she was completely under his spell. She laughed at his jokes, even when they were at my expense. I tried to ignore it at first, but I could feel it every time she defended him or went along with his comments. She was pulling farther away. It was like watching her slip away without even realizing it. But it wasn't just her. Daniel had a way of talking over me during family gatherings. He would interrupt me mid-sentence, belittle my opinions, or even just dismiss what I had to say entirely. It wasn't obvious at first, but the more I paid attention, the more it became clear. This wasn't just about him being a strategic game player. This was about him trying to position himself as the leader, the authority, and slowly, everyone else was starting to fall in line. I noticed it with my dad, too. We used to joke around together, talk about everything from work to life to random stuff. But now, he only seemed to care about what Daniel had to say. All their conversations were about business, investments, and whatever else Daniel was pushing. It felt like I was being shut out, like my dad wasn't the same anymore. Then my mom accidentally let something slip one evening while we were talking about random stuff. She mentioned how Daniel had been advising my dad on some financial matters. My dad had never been the type to take advice from outsiders, especially not about something as serious as money. It didn't sit right with me, and I immediately started to wonder what Daniel was up to. I decided to dig a little deeper. I didn't have much to go on, but I knew I had to find out what was really happening. After some quiet investigation, I found out that Daniel had convinced my dad to invest a large sum of money into some business opportunity. The more I learned, the more my instincts screamed that something wasn't right. My dad would never do something like this without a serious, cautious approach, but he was acting completely out of character. I reached out to a friend of mine who was good with financial matters. He listened to the details and immediately told me that the kind of investments Daniel was pushing sounded like classic scams. The projects Daniel was involved in had all the hallmarks of a con job: empty promises, vague details, and an overwhelming push to get money up front. That was when it hit me. Daniel wasn't just playing a game, he was playing a much more dangerous game, and my dad was being pulled into it without even realizing it. When I confronted my sister, it didn't go well. She didn't just defend Daniel, she accused me of being jealous of him, of trying to ruin things between them. She was so defensive, so blinded by loyalty, that it was clear she wasn't going to listen to reason. That was when I realized how deeply Daniel had sunk his claws into her. It wasn't just about the game anymore. She had completely fallen for whatever charm he was using to manipulate everyone around him. I tried again with my dad, but he just dismissed my concerns. "Daniel is just ambitious," he said. "You're overreacting." It was like I was talking to a brick wall. He wouldn't hear me, and that made everything worse. But my cousin wasn't done yet. He joined me in digging into Daniel's past, and what we found was even worse than I had feared. Daniel had a long history of getting people to invest in ventures that always ended up failing. The common thread was that Daniel would walk away fine, leaving others to bear the financial burden. It was clear that he wasn't interested in success. He was interested in control, and more importantly, in getting as much money as he could. Now I knew for sure that I had to do something. I couldn't let my dad lose everything without exposing Daniel for who he really was. But the challenge now was how to do it without making myself look like the bad guy, without tearing the family apart in the process. It wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't going to sit back and watch this happen. The more I dug into Daniel's background, the more disturbing it became. My cousin and I searched for weeks, and at first, Daniel's past seemed clean. But then we started finding small details, an old LinkedIn profile, a business article with his name misspelled. It took effort, but eventually, we found the cracks in his carefully curated image. It was like trying to catch smoke with your hands. His social media was sparse, and there were barely any records of him in connection with past businesses. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never find anything. It was as if he had erased every piece of himself before stepping into our lives. But we kept searching. One night, while scrolling through some old business directories and forums, we found a name that seemed to pop up frequently, someone who had crossed paths with Daniel years ago. It took some convincing, but eventually we tracked him down. He wasn't hard to find. A few phone calls and a quick meeting, and we were sitting across from someone who knew Daniel all too well. This person told us exactly what we were afraid of hearing. He confirmed what we had been suspecting all along. Daniel had a pattern. He would charm families, ingratiate himself into their lives, and then convince them to make investments, promising big returns. But once he got what he wanted, he'd vanish, leaving the family financially wrecked. The man didn't mince words. He said Daniel was a professional at exploiting people's trust. That was exactly how he described it. He didn't just sell a dream, he sold a lie, and once he had what he needed, he moved on to the next target. It felt like everything we'd suspected was true, but I still couldn't understand why my dad couldn't see it, why he was so blinded by Daniel, why my sister was so defensive of him. That night, I decided to talk to my mother again. She had been quiet for days, avoiding eye contact whenever I mentioned Daniel. When I brought up the conversation, she sighed deeply, looking around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "I'm scared too," she admitted in a hushed voice, "but I don't want to make a scene. Your father trusts him, and I don't know what to do." She was shaking her head, clearly torn between what she felt and what she thought was best for the family. She didn't want to create a rift, but it was obvious that she didn't trust Daniel either. Despite everything, she still urged me to tread carefully, like somehow I was the one in danger of causing trouble. She seemed more concerned with keeping peace than preventing something that could destroy us all. The next day, I tried to talk to my sister again. I had hoped that by now she'd start seeing the bigger picture, but it wasn't the case. When I started laying out the facts, she lashed out. Her face red with anger, she yelled, "You're just jealous. You don't like that Daniel's successful, and you're trying to ruin my marriage." It stung. She couldn't see that I wasn't attacking her husband. I was trying to protect her from someone who was taking advantage of all of us. But there was no reasoning with her. Every time I tried, she shut me down, accusing me of being bitter and envious. It was like I was talking to a wall. She was completely under Daniel's spell, and I could see it more clearly now than ever before. As if things weren't bad enough, I found out something that made my blood run cold. My cousin had been looking into my father's finances, just to see if there was any unusual activity, and what he uncovered sent chills down my spine. A large sum of money had been withdrawn from my dad's account. It was an investment, of course, but the problem was Daniel had persuaded him to do it, and this wasn't the first time. This was an additional sum, money that wasn't even part of the original plan. My father had always been careful with his finances, especially when it came to large investments. But now it looked like he was throwing caution to the wind, all because Daniel had convinced him that this was the next big opportunity. The more we uncovered, the more divided the family became. Some relatives were on my side, expressing doubts about Daniel. They quietly admitted that they didn't fully trust him, but they didn't want to speak out loud for fear of causing drama. Others, though, had fully bought into Daniel's charm and were either ignoring the signs or defending him outright. The division was starting to tear us apart. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew that it was only going to get worse. At a family dinner a few days later, Daniel made another pointed remark that left me feeling like I was being publicly attacked. He was talking about how some people struggle with accepting change, and everyone laughed, even my sister, but I knew it was aimed directly at me. It was his way of mocking me, letting everyone know that I was the one who didn't get it, that I was the one holding up progress. I kept my mouth shut, but I could feel the frustration building up inside. Finally, my mother reached her breaking point. She found me in the kitchen late one night, and this time, she didn't hold back. "Your father has never been this reckless with money before," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm scared. I don't know what to do, but I don't trust him." For the first time, she was openly admitting her fears, and it was clear she was just as worried as I was. But she still couldn't bring herself to confront my dad directly. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. My friend who had been helping me track the financial trail suggested I seek out a professional financial advisor. It was the only way to make sure my father was making decisions with all the facts in front of him. The sooner we got the right legal and financial advice, the sooner we could stop this before it escalated any further. But then something changed. My cousin found something that would change everything. He uncovered a document linking Daniel to a failed company under a different name. The company had collapsed, and the legal documents showed that Daniel had used an alias during that time. This was the smoking gun I needed. This was the proof that Daniel wasn't just a charming guy with a bad investment idea. He was a con artist, and now we had evidence to prove it. I knew I had to act fast, but the problem was, doing so could cause irreparable damage to my family. Exposing Daniel would likely destroy my relationship with my sister, the trust my father had in him, and the fragile peace we'd managed to hold together. But if I didn't act, my dad could lose everything, and that wasn't something I was willing to sit back and watch. I had to make a choice. The next family gathering would be the moment of reckoning. It was time to expose the truth. The family gathering had arrived, and I knew it was time to act. My cousin, who had been helping me investigate Daniel, was by my side. We had all the evidence we needed, but I couldn't afford to be reckless. I knew I had to present the truth carefully or risk coming across as the aggressor. I didn't want to alienate my entire family, but I also couldn't let Daniel continue to manipulate everyone. The stakes were high, and I had to make sure I didn't lose control of the situation. Dinner started off as usual. The chatter was loud, people catching up, talking about their jobs, the kids, random family news. Daniel, though, was doing what he does best, grandstanding. He was sitting at the head of the table, acting like he owned the place. He was talking about how he was going to help my father expand his investments and grow the family wealth. He made himself sound like the financial savior we'd all been waiting for. The way he spoke, it was like he had all the answers, like he was the only one who truly understood how to make the family's money work for them. My sister sat beside him, practically glowing with pride. She was hanging on his every word, praising him endlessly for being so smart and driven. I clenched my fists under the table, my mind racing. She had no idea what was really happening. She was so blind to it all, so completely taken in by him. I tried to focus on the task at hand and not let my anger get the best of me. I wasn't here to fight with her. I was here to protect the family. I waited for the right moment, watching Daniel soak in the praise, pretending like he wasn't enjoying it. When the conversation shifted toward more talk of his financial plans, I decided to speak up, calmly. I interrupted and asked, "Has anyone actually looked into Daniel's past ventures?" The room went quiet instantly. People turned to look at me, unsure of where this was going. I kept my tone neutral, not accusatory, just a question that needed answering. Daniel immediately tried to dismiss me, waving his hand like I was being ridiculous. "That's just internet nonsense," he said. "Business failures happen all the time. Anyone can look up old projects, but it doesn't mean they define who I am." His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. He was trying to brush me off, but I was ready. I pulled out the first piece of evidence, documents showing that Daniel had been involved in a business that went bankrupt under a different name. I placed them on the table, watching my father's face as he flipped through them. There was confusion, but not enough doubt yet. He looked at Daniel for an explanation, but Daniel just shrugged it off like it didn't matter. I wasn't done yet. I presented more evidence, proof that Daniel had been banned from doing business in another state due to financial misconduct. The room tensed. This wasn't just some failed business venture. This was a serious red flag. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Some people exchanged glances, their faces starting to show signs of doubt, but no one spoke up yet. My father's eyes flickered between me and Daniel. It was clear he was starting to question things, but he was still holding on to his trust in Daniel. My sister couldn't take it anymore. She jumped to his defense, her face flushed with anger. "You're trying to ruin my marriage," she yelled, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're just jealous of what Daniel has accomplished, and you can't stand seeing me happy." I tried to stay calm, but it was hard. She had no idea what was at stake here. I wasn't trying to tear her marriage apart. I was trying to protect the family from someone who had been playing us all. My mother, who had been quietly listening up to that point, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should pause the investments for now," she said, her voice hesitant but clear. Her words were like a crack in the dam, a small shift in the tide. She had always been the peacemaker, but now she was questioning the decisions my father had made. I could see her concern in her eyes, the same concern I'd been feeling for weeks. For the first time, I saw a crack in my father's unwavering trust in Daniel. He paused, his voice uncertain, He looked directly at Daniel and asked, "Is there anything else I should know?" It wasn't a harsh accusation, but it was a crack in the foundation of trust that Daniel had built. I could tell Daniel didn't like being questioned. His response was sharp, almost hostile. "I don't need to explain myself to you people," he snapped, his calm facade slipping for the first time. His words hung in the air, heavy and cold. The change in his demeanor was instant. Daniel's smile disappeared, replaced with a scowl. He looked like he was losing control of the situation, and that was the moment I knew we were getting to him. My sister looked visibly shaken. She had never seen him act this way. He had always been so charming, so smooth, but now, in front of everyone, he was showing his true colors. The tension in the room was palpable. Some family members looked at Daniel with uncertainty now, their doubt beginning to show. But there were still some who were loyal to him, still convinced that he was the good guy in all this. The division was clear, and I knew it wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning. Dinner ended with strained conversation and awkward silences. Some relatives pulled me aside to say they were on my side, that they were starting to see what I had been saying all along. Others stayed close to Daniel, still defending him. My sister refused to speak to me the rest of the night, and I could tell she was hurt. But this wasn't about her feelings anymore. It was about saving my father from making a mistake that could cost him everything. I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel was still dangerous, and he wasn't going to give up easily. But cracks were showing, and I had to keep pushing forward. The truth was out there, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. This fight wasn't over yet. After the confrontation at the family gathering, things took a strange turn. My father didn't reach out for a few days. The silence was deafening. Normally, after something like that, he'd want to talk about it, figure out where things went wrong, and try to fix it. But this time, he didn't make a single move. It was like he was in his own world, processing everything, trying to make sense of what had happened. My mother mentioned that he was thinking things over, but it felt like we were all in limbo, just waiting for something to happen. In the meantime, my sister and Daniel started working overtime to spin the situation in their favor. They began telling family members that I was just being jealous, trying to stir up drama because I couldn't stand to see them succeed. It was infuriating. They painted me as the bad guy, the troublemaker who was only looking out for myself. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard when people I cared about started questioning my intentions. They were making it look like I was the villain in my own family story. Then things took another turn. One afternoon, my cousin showed me a text he'd received from my sister. It wasn't a direct attack, but the passive-aggressive tone was hard to ignore. She had sent a message telling him, "You need to stay out of our marriage." It wasn't a threat exactly, but it was clear she was drawing a line. She didn't want anyone interfering with her life, even if that meant ignoring the very real danger Daniel posed. I could tell the situation was escalating, and I couldn't just stand by anymore. I decided to take the next step. I knew my father wouldn't listen to me directly, but maybe he'd listen to a professional. I convinced my mother to push him into seeing a financial advisor. It wasn't easy. My father had always prided himself on being able to handle his own investments, and I knew he'd be resistant. But my mother, who had grown more worried by the day, finally agreed. We set up an appointment with a trusted advisor who specialized in family wealth management. The advisor was quick to spot the red flags in Daniel's investment proposals. Within minutes, he pointed out several key issues that my father had never noticed. Inconsistencies in the paperwork, exaggerated claims of returns, and several signs that the investments were far riskier than Daniel had led my father to believe. It was a wake-up call for my dad. He had always been careful with money, but Daniel had convinced him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now all of that trust was unraveling, and I could see it on my father's face when the advisor laid out the truth. But even with the advisor's verdict, it wasn't over. The following day, my father pulled Daniel aside for a private conversation. I don't know exactly what was said, but I overheard bits and pieces. Daniel was trying to brush off the concerns, saying, "Business is about trust," like it was all just a misunderstanding. My father started asking more questions. He wasn't outright rejecting Daniel yet, but I could see the doubt creeping in. The charm was wearing off, and for the first time, he was hesitating before making financial decisions based on Daniel's advice. A few hours later, my sister called me in tears. She was distraught, accusing me of ruining her marriage, of breaking up their perfect life. I didn't respond the way she wanted me to. I wasn't going to get caught in the blame game. I simply said, if Daniel had nothing to hide, this wouldn't be an issue. I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize. What was I supposed to apologize for? Protecting my family? I wasn't the one making shady deals behind closed doors. She needed to understand that, but it didn't seem like she was ready to. Things continued to shift in subtle ways after that. My father, now deeply suspicious, made the decision to pause all investments with Daniel indefinitely. It wasn't a complete rejection, but it was a clear signal that he wasn't comfortable moving forward. Daniel didn't take it well. He started overcompensating, showering my father with expensive gifts and offering free financial advice, like he was trying to win back trust. It was obvious he was desperate. The charm wasn't working anymore. My father wasn't swayed by the gifts, and I could tell Daniel was starting to unravel. He had put so much into trying to control the situation, but now he was losing his grip. I noticed my sister was starting to pull back too. She wasn't as vocal in her defense of Daniel anymore. It was like she was beginning to process everything, but she was still too proud to admit she had been wrong. She wasn't speaking up as much when family members questioned Daniel, and I could see the doubt starting to creep in. It wasn't a big shift, but it was enough to show that she was starting to think about things differently. But then Daniel hit his breaking point. I don't know what triggered it, but one night, after my father had told him he wasn't going to invest any more money, Daniel snapped. I could hear his voice raised in frustration as he shouted, "If you don't trust me, maybe I shouldn't waste my time here." The room went quiet. No one knew how to respond. My father just stared at him, calm but unyielding. The tension in the air was thick. It was clear that Daniel's last-ditch effort to manipulate the situation was failing. That was it. My father, calm as ever, looked at Daniel and simply said, "I will not be investing any more money." The finality of his words hit everyone like a ton of bricks. Daniel stood there, seething, unable to get a word in. After a few moments of silence, he turned and walked toward the door. My sister followed him, her eyes red, but she didn't look back. She just walked out, leaving the rest of us sitting in stunned silence. My father sat there, visibly shaken but somehow relieved. He didn't say anything for a long time. I could see the weight of it all on his face. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, family, and realizing that the person he thought was a partner had been using him the whole time. The tension was unbearable, but I knew we had made the right call. Daniel had lost, and with him, my sister had chosen to follow. Whether or not she'd ever admit it, things were never going to be the same. After everything that happened with Daniel, things between my sister and the rest of the family only got worse. She completely cut off contact with us. She refused to speak to me or my parents. It was like she blamed us for everything that had gone wrong. At first I thought she'd come around, that maybe after some time she'd see what we had been trying to warn her about. But that never happened. Every attempt to reach out was met with silence, and it was clear she was aligning herself completely with Daniel no matter what. Daniel wasn't just laying low after being kicked out of the family's financial affairs. Oh no, he had a plan, and it was a nasty one. He started a smear campaign, telling mutual friends that my father was cheap and afraid of success, and that we had ruined his business. The more I heard about what he was saying, the more it became clear he was playing the victim. According to him, my family was just bitter and jealous of his success, and we were sabotaging him because we couldn't handle how successful he was. It made me sick, but I knew there was nothing I could do to stop it. He was working hard to spin the narrative in his favor. My mother, who had always been a calming force in the family, couldn't hold back anymore. One evening she told me that she wished we had been more cautious with Daniel from the beginning. I didn't need her to tell me that. I'd known from the start that something didn't feel right, but I had hoped my instincts were wrong. She had always trusted my father's judgment, but now, even she was admitting that they had been too quick to accept Daniel without question. Things started to escalate when my cousin came to me with a disturbing rumor. Daniel had been telling people that our family tried to sabotage his business because we were jealous of his success. He even painted the situation as if we had tried to ruin his reputation deliberately. I couldn't believe it. He was turning the whole story around and trying to make himself look like the hero in this twisted drama. My cousin couldn't believe it either, but it made sense, given everything that had happened. Daniel wasn't just trying to protect his business, he was trying to destroy ours. Despite all the chaos, my father did seem to find some relief. He admitted to me that while everything that had unfolded was painful, he was glad he had caught on before losing even more money. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but he didn't have to say anything. He was deeply hurt by what Daniel had done and by my sister's blind loyalty, but he was also thankful for the truth coming to light before it was too late. He knew that he had dodged a bullet, even if it meant losing my sister in the process. My sister wasn't done, though. She posted something on social media that made it even harder to swallow. It was vague, but it was clearly about us. She wrote about how painful it is when family doesn't support your happiness. I rolled my eyes when I saw it. She was still clinging to this illusion that Daniel was somehow the good guy, the one who had been wronged, and she was the only one who could see his greatness. It was heartbreaking, but I couldn't change her mind. She had to see the truth herself, and I knew that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Then Daniel made one last attempt to get back into my father's good graces. He sent a message that was so full of arrogance it made my blood boil. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this," he said. My father didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had already made his decision, and nothing Daniel could say would change that. A few days after that, my father did something I knew was coming. He blocked Daniel's number permanently. That was it. No more calls, no more messages. Daniel was cut off for good. From that moment, there was no further contact, and I knew we had finally drawn a line in the sand. As for my sister, she didn't budge. She stood by Daniel, refusing to see the truth, even though everything around her was falling apart. She kept telling everyone that she believed in him, no matter what. It was hard to watch, knowing that she was so deep into this relationship that she couldn't even see how damaging it was. I realized that if she was ever going to come to her senses, it would have to happen on her own. There was nothing I could do to force her to see it. Meanwhile, Daniel's business took a hit. My cousin heard that another investor had pulled out after finding out about Daniel's past. His financial future was looking grim, and it seemed like the walls were closing in on him. It was hard to feel any sympathy for him. He had brought all of this on himself, and I wasn't about to feel bad for someone who had tried to take advantage of my family. Then, not long after that, my sister made a big announcement. She and Daniel were moving to another city. They were cutting ties with most of the family, including my parents and me. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. I hadn't expected her to just walk away like that, but she did. She had chosen him over all of us, and I couldn't change that. My father, though he was hurt, seemed resigned to the situation. "At least now we know where we stand," he said one evening, sitting in his chair, looking out the window. It was clear that he was still processing everything, but he knew that this was the end of it. My sister had made her choice, and there was nothing we could do to bring her back. A small victory came when my cousin found out that Daniel's finances were in even worse shape than we thought. Multiple investors had pulled out, and it looked like his business was on the verge of collapse. It didn't feel good, exactly, but it was a reminder that his lies were finally catching up with him. As time went on, my sister's silence continued. She didn't even reach out on our mother's birthday, which stung more than I expected. It was like she was trying to erase the past, to pretend like we had never been a family. I couldn't force her to change, and I had no idea what it would take for her to finally see the truth. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. My sister was still with Daniel, and until she woke up, there would always be a part of me that feared this whole thing might come crashing down again. Maybe years from now, or maybe something devastating would finally open her eyes. But for now, it was just waiting. Weeks passed, and my sister's absence became even more noticeable. She had stopped answering my calls and was ignoring family group messages. At first, I thought it was just a phase, that maybe she needed space to process everything that had happened. But as time dragged on, my mother grew increasingly worried. She didn't want to push too hard, not wanting to risk driving my sister further away. But it was clear that this wasn't just a temporary silence. Something had shifted, and my sister was pulling further and further into Daniel's world. I couldn't help but feel that she was choosing him over all of us, even though she wouldn't admit it. One day, my cousin showed me a social media post that Daniel had made. He was bragging about cutting toxic people out of his life and choosing a new family. It was like a direct shot at us, as if he was now positioning himself as the victim and claiming that we were the ones in the wrong. I didn't react. What was the point? I had already seen the kind of person he was, and this post was just more of the same. It was a pathetic attempt to justify his behavior and continue the narrative that we were the bad guys. But I knew it wasn't over. Daniel wasn't done yet. A few days later, I found out through a friend that Daniel's business was in serious trouble. After losing several investors, he was struggling to keep things afloat. The debt was piling up, and it seemed like his empire was starting to crumble. I wasn't surprised. It was only a matter of time before everything caught up to him. But I wasn't about to sit back and watch him destroy more lives, even if it wasn't just my family anymore. I knew he was a manipulator, and I couldn't let him drag my father or anyone else into his mess. Then, out of nowhere, my sister called my mother. She accused us of sabotaging her marriage, claiming that we were all against her happiness. She wouldn't speak to me directly, of course. It was like she was pretending I didn't exist. My mother was beside herself, heartbroken. She finally admitted just how much Daniel controlled her. She couldn't understand how her own daughter had been so easily taken in by someone like him. It was painful to watch, but I kept my frustration in check. There was no point in getting into a shouting match with her, no point in trying to force her to see the truth. If she couldn't figure it out herself, then it wasn't something I could fix. I received a cryptic message a few days later. It was anonymous, but the words stuck with me. Daniel is not who he says he is. I showed it to my cousin, and we tried to trace the message, but it led nowhere. It was as if someone just wanted to send a warning, but they were too afraid to come forward themselves. Still, I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't the first time I'd heard someone say something similar, and it just confirmed what I had been thinking all along. That same cousin, always the investigator, managed to track down someone who had once worked with Daniel. This person, a former business partner, confirmed what we had suspected all along. Daniel had a long history of manipulating people and using financial deception to get ahead. He'd done it before, and he was doing it again. It was like a light bulb went off. Daniel wasn't just unlucky or misguided, he was a fraud. Things took another unsettling turn when my father noticed something odd in his bank account. There had been an unauthorized attempt to withdraw money. My father was furious and immediately contacted his bank. Fortunately, the transaction was flagged before any money was taken, but it was enough to send up red flags. We were dealing with a man who wasn't just trying to convince us to invest, he was now attempting to take money from us directly. It was clear that his desperation had reached new heights. My cousin's next discovery only confirmed my worst fears. Daniel had started borrowing money from multiple people and was failing to repay them. Word was spreading fast about his inability to meet obligations, and it was only a matter of time before his network of investors started pulling out completely. He was running out of people to manipulate, but he wasn't about to give up. Then my sister texted my mother again, this time justifying Daniel's actions. She told her that Daniel was going through a rough time and that she needed to stand by him. It was the same tired excuse I had heard before. It wasn't the first time Daniel had been in trouble, and it wouldn't be the last. But my sister wasn't seeing it. She was still wrapped up in the idea that he needed her, that somehow standing by him would fix everything. She was just another victim in his long line of manipulations. My father wasn't sitting idly by, though. After consulting with his financial advisor, he was given a grim warning. If Daniel made any further attempts to manipulate or steal from him, they should consider taking legal action. I knew my father wasn't one to jump into legal battles, but he was ready to protect his assets. He wasn't going to let Daniel take advantage of him again. Then, a few weeks later, I ran into Daniel at a local event. It was like he hadn't changed at all. He was smug, acting like he was still in control. He looked at me with that same arrogant smile and said, "I always get what I want in the end." I didn't even engage. I just walked away. I knew that Daniel wasn't someone who could be reasoned with, and I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of getting a rise out of me. Meanwhile, my father had been quietly making his own moves. Without telling my sister, he consulted with a lawyer to secure all of his financial assets, ensuring Daniel couldn't take advantage of him again. It wasn't something my sister needed to know at the moment, especially since she was still defending him. But my father had finally made it clear that he wasn't going to let Daniel manipulate him any further. Then came Daniel's last-ditch effort. He tried once again to convince my father to invest in one of his schemes. This time, my father completely ignored him. There was no more room for discussion, no more chances. Daniel had exhausted all of his options with our family, and my father wasn't about to fall for his tactics again. I had a gut feeling, though, that this wasn't the end. Daniel wasn't the type to let things go quietly. Something told me he would try again, maybe not immediately, but when he was backed into a corner. The calm before the storm felt eerily quiet, and I knew this wasn't over yet. Daniel still had something up his sleeve, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. My sister's sudden return caught everyone off guard. She showed up at our parents' house one evening, looking completely exhausted, like she hadn't slept properly in days. She didn't say much at first, just that she needed space from Daniel. The words seemed rehearsed, and there was something about her demeanor that made it clear she wasn't telling the whole truth. She wasn't the same as before, and that wasn't lost on any of us. We tried to get more out of her, to ask if she was planning on going back to Daniel or what her next steps were, but she deflected every question. She kept changing the subject or downplaying the situation. It was like she was still caught between the reality she was living and the illusion that Daniel had spun for her. The whole thing felt like a ticking time bomb, and we all knew it wasn't over, no matter how much she tried to act like everything was fine. Around the same time, my cousin dug deeper into Daniel's financial activities. He had been suspicious for a while, and what he found was more disturbing than I could have imagined. It turned out that Daniel had been convincing my sister to let him borrow her credit card for small things, gas, groceries, a meal here and there. But when she checked her statements, she realized the charges were much larger and more frequent than she remembered approving. The transactions were small at first, but they had been adding up over time. It was like Daniel had found another way to control her, even financially. He was draining her resources without her realizing it. When my cousin brought it up to me, I knew I had to act fast. I waited for the right moment to bring it up to my sister. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still looking tired and distant. I told her what we had uncovered, trying to keep the conversation calm. I asked if she had noticed anything unusual with her credit card statements. At first she was defensive, claiming nothing was wrong, but after some gentle prodding, she finally admitted that she had noticed money missing. She explained how Daniel always had an excuse when she asked about it, saying things like he needed to borrow some money for a business opportunity. It was like a light bulb went off for her, but she was still hesitant to fully accept that Daniel had been using her. Before we could dig deeper, the situation escalated. Within hours of her admission, Daniel showed up at the house. He was furious, demanding to see my sister. My father and I refused to let him in, knowing what would happen if he got the chance. Daniel was relentless, though, pacing outside and yelling at the door. He didn't care who was around, he just wanted to make sure my sister came out and saw him. When she refused to come outside, he exploded. He was shouting about how she was abandoning him in his time of need, and how we had ruined everything. It was almost like he didn't care about the truth, only that he was losing control. My mother, seeing how aggressive Daniel was getting, called the police. We didn't want things to get violent, and we knew it was only a matter of time before Daniel snapped completely. He left before the police arrived, but not before making a scene in front of the whole neighborhood. He was yelling and calling us all sorts of names. It was clear he was trying to publicly humiliate my family. That night, my sister was quieter than usual. She didn't say much, but I noticed she wasn't defending Daniel as strongly. A few days later, she finally admitted, Maybe I ignored some red flags. It wasn't a full admission, but it was a start. She revealed that he had been monitoring her phone and gaslighting her, making her doubt her own reality. She was crying, saying she didn't know how she had let it get this far. It was heartbreaking to watch, but I knew it was the first step toward her seeing the truth. She had been so deep in it that she hadn't even realized what was happening to her. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Daniel's retaliation began. We started receiving harassing calls and messages from unknown numbers. The people on the other end were calling us liars and manipulators, accusing us of trying to destroy Daniel's life. It was clear he was rallying people to his side, spreading lies about us in an attempt to turn the narrative around. It was infuriating to see how far he was willing to go to make us look like the bad guys. My cousin, always the one to investigate, discovered that Daniel was actively spreading a twisted version of events to anyone who would listen. He was telling people that my family was brainwashing my sister, and that we were forcing her to turn against him. I couldn't believe it. This man was painting us as villains while he was the one trying to ruin our family. But the more he spread his lies, the more isolated he became. His manipulation tactics were becoming obvious to more people. My father wasn't going to let this slide. He consulted a lawyer about getting a restraining order against Daniel. We needed legal protection, especially now that Daniel's behavior was escalating. It wasn't just about protecting our family anymore. It was about protecting my sister, who was still vulnerable to him. We knew Daniel wouldn't stop, and we had to be prepared for whatever came next. Despite everything that had happened, my sister was still conflicted. She texted my mother, saying she wanted to reach out to Daniel. She claimed he was going through a rough time and that he needed her. I could see how torn she was, but I couldn't let her go back to him. I reminded her of everything we had uncovered, how he had used her, how he had drained her finances, how he had lied to her for months. It wasn't easy, but I kept pushing her to stay strong. She had to see that Daniel wasn't the man she thought he was. Things took a darker turn when my sister received a voicemail from Daniel. The message was chilling. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. It was a threat, plain and simple. Daniel was trying to manipulate her again, trying to make her feel responsible for his downfall. It was his last desperate attempt to keep her under his control. But this time, it wasn't going to work. My family rallied together, determined to protect my sister. My parents, my cousin, and even some extended family members all stepped up, offering support and making it clear that they would do whatever it took to help her break free from Daniel. It was the first time in a long while that we felt united in this fight. We knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Daniel wasn't going to give up without a fight, and my sister still had a long way to go before she fully understood the depth of his manipulation. But for the first time, we were standing together as a family, ready to protect each other from whatever came next. After everything that had happened, my sister finally agreed to take the step we all knew was necessary. She filed a restraining order against Daniel. It wasn't easy for her. She had been so tied up in the relationship, so convinced that Daniel could change, but she had finally come to realize just how dangerous he truly was. The moment she signed the papers felt like a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had taken back control of her life. As soon as Daniel realized that his manipulation wasn't working anymore, he exploded online. He posted a long, bitter rant on social media about how he had been betrayed by everyone, claiming that money ruins relationships. The post was full of self-pity, with him blaming everyone else for his downfall. He couldn't take responsibility for his own actions. Instead, he spun it into a sob story, painting himself as the victim. It was laughable, honestly, but it was also sad to see how deep his delusions ran. Meanwhile, my sister began to take the necessary steps to heal. She started therapy, something we had been suggesting for months. It wasn't easy for her, but she was finally acknowledging how deeply Daniel had manipulated her. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, isolation, and slowly erasing her sense of self. She had been so blinded by her love for him that she hadn't seen the damage he was causing until it was too late. Therapy helped her start putting the pieces back together. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, she was focused on rebuilding herself. While she was working on healing, my cousin uncovered more about Daniel's legal troubles. Apparently, he was being sued by multiple former investors for fraud. It seemed like every person Daniel had conned was finally catching up with him. His past was coming back to haunt him, and he couldn't keep his lies straight anymore. The same investors who had once believed in his business were now in the process of taking him to court. It wasn't just my family that he had hurt. He'd been doing this to everyone he could find, and now the consequences were starting to pile up. Things got worse for Daniel when his main investor pulled out. The man had been funding Daniel's business ventures for years, but after everything that had come to light, he no longer wanted to be associated with him. The withdrawal left Daniel broke. He had no more backing, no more connections, and no one willing to give him another chance. The web he had woven for himself was unraveling fast, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Daniel's desperation led him to send one last email to my sister. The message was full of pleading, trying to guilt her into giving him one more chance. He claimed he had changed, that he needed her support more than ever, but my sister didn't respond. She didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. The truth had been laid out in front of her, and she wasn't going to fall for it again. The next move my sister made was to block Daniel on every platform, permanently cutting him off from her life. It was a clean break, and it was exactly what she needed to do. No more texts, no more calls, no more emotional manipulation. She was done. And this time, it was final. With Daniel completely out of the picture, my sister moved back home. It wasn't forever, but it was a step toward her healing. She needed the space to get her bearings, to focus on herself and on her future. My parents were incredibly supportive, and having her back home was a comfort to all of us. She started picking up the pieces, rebuilding her confidence, and for the first time in a long while, she was truly focused on her own happiness. As for Daniel, he wasn't done trying to make himself look like the victim. He released a now-deleted video, blaming my family for ruining his future. The video was another attempt to manipulate the narrative, to make us look like the villains in his twisted story. But by that point, no one was buying it. His lies were so transparent, and his desperation was so obvious that it only made him look worse. It wasn't long before he deleted the video, realizing that no one was taking him seriously anymore. My father, after everything that had happened, admitted that he almost fell for Daniel's schemes. He said he was grateful that I had helped him see the truth before it was too late. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one we needed to have. We had been through a lot as a family, and we all learned valuable lessons about trust and vigilance. My father was relieved that we had dodged a major bullet, but he was still shaken by how easily Daniel had gained his trust in the first place. As for Daniel, it seemed like his luck had finally run out. My cousin heard that he had left town, likely avoid the mounting legal consequences. It wasn't a huge surprise. He had been backed into a corner, and now he was running. He had no more options, and it looked like he was trying to escape the fallout before it completely destroyed him. Now that Daniel was out of the picture, my family was finally able to start moving forward. We had been through so much, but in the end, we had come together stronger than ever. My sister, while still on her journey, was making incredible progress. She had admitted to herself just how blind she had been, and she was ready to move on with her life. A year has passed since all of this started, and things are looking up. My sister is happy and healthy. She's in a better place, and she's finally free from the chains that Daniel had placed on her. As for Daniel, he's completely disappeared from our lives. No more messages, no more lies. He's gone, and we're all better for it. Looking back, I can't help but reflect on how manipulative charmers like Daniel can wreak havoc on people's lives. It's easy to get swept up in the illusion of someone being too good to be true, but trust your instincts always. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. In the end, standing up for what's right is the only way to ensure you come out on top. The ultimate victory wasn't just about getting Daniel out of our lives, it was about reclaiming the peace and happiness that he had stolen from us. And now, we're free.